Well, good afternoon and welcome. This is the Community College League of California's Vote 2020 Town Hall with special guest, the Honorable Secretary of State, Alex Padilla. My name is Larry Galizio. I'm the President and CEO of the League. And while we good afternoon and welcome. This is the Community College League of California's Vote 2020 Town Hall. Put forth a little survey with 3 questions that we hope you'll take a little bit of time to answer to get us started. So we have the survey coming soon. And so there's the first question. If you would mind, please answering the first question, and then it will help inform our conversation. Well, thank you for participating in that brief survey. I'm sure it was particularly inspiring to see some of you. This will be your first election where you will be voting, so we appreciate that. Just some logistics for this webinar. The chat function has been disabled for webinar participants. However, we do encourage you to take advantage of the fact that we have the Secretary of State and also representative from the student government. So if you have a question for the Secretary of State, please use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. And also, you do not have to take notes. Both the webinar recording and the PowerPoint slide deck will be emailed out to everyone, to all of you who have registered. So we appreciate that. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our first guest. But first, actually, we should give you the poll results. So we can take a look at the poll results. So it looks like, Mr. Secretary, you'll be pleased to see that 97% are registered to vote. And so we're working as best we can to increase those numbers. So we appreciate that. And then again, for some of you, it will be your first election, which is fantastic. We appreciate that. And so 4 hours seems a bit like a random number of hours. However, it is a number of hours where you're, at least at some point, at some level, a little more engaged and can really help a campaign as opposed to spending 10 or 15 minutes. If you spend a good 4 hours or more, you're really involved in a campaign. So thank you for doing that survey and filling that out. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to do this afternoon in this next hour, shortly we'll have Secretary of State Padilla, who will make some remarks, and there will be some time, we believe, for some Q&A for the Secretary. And then very pleased that we will also have the Vice President for Legislative Affairs from the California Community College's Student Senate, and also some Q&A for him. So with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce our special guest, the Honorable Secretary of State, Alex Padilla. And he was very adamant to make this a short biography. So we'll do the best we can. So as you know, Alex Padilla is the Secretary of State. And his focus really has been on modernizing the office, increasing voter registration and participation, and also strengthening voting rights. In 2018, he launched the California Motor Voter Program, which automatically registers eligible Californians to vote when they obtain or renew their state ID or driver's license. The program registered 1 million new voters just in the first year alone. In November 2019, California reached a record high 20.3 million registered voters. Mr. Padilla also oversaw the 2018 election, in which 64.5% of registered voters cast a ballot, which is the highest turnout for a gubernatorial election since 1982. He sponsored legislation in 2015 to establish vote centers, expand early voting, and implement same-day conditional voter registration through the Voters' Choice Act. Prior to his Secretary of State tenure, he served 2 terms in the San Fernando Valley, in the California State Senate representing the San Fernando Valley, specifically East San Fernando Valley, which is on, and also he served on the LA City Council. Mr. Padilla grew up in the San Fernando Valley. He attended local public schools, and he graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, otherwise known as MIT, with a degree in mechanical engineering. So without further ado, I turn it over to Secretary of State Alex Padilla.
Well, thank you, Larry, and good afternoon, everybody. After 6 months of Zooms, I still got to ask, can you hear me okay? Can you see me okay? Doing all the tech check. Well, first of all, appreciate this opportunity to engage with a very engaged audience, right? I saw the poll results, huge registration rates, huge propensity in terms of voters. Your frequency in voting is very, very impressive, and your level of engagement, right? Knowing that, well, it's one thing to register and cast our vote, but we engage on behalf of issues and candidates. That's a true commitment to democracy. So I know I may be speaking a little bit to the choir here, but I do think it was important to connect directly and let you all know about some of the changes to anticipate in the upcoming November election. Yes, as voters, number one, because things will be a little bit different for everybody, but number two, as clear leaders at your respective campuses and in your communities and even in your family. People turn to you for information and guidance. I want to make sure you have what you need to be able to navigate this general election, which is now 55 days away. Tuesday, November 3rd. And I'm going to stop calling it Election Day. One of the first things I invite you to do is stop thinking of Tuesday, November 3rd as Election Day and start thinking about it as simply the last day to vote, right? There's a distinction there. In the interest of time, and I'd rather get to your questions, I'm going to bypass a lot of the preface of these remarks, all the reasons why your vote is important, election results matter, Think back to the March primary. It seems like so long ago, prior to the COVID declarations of emergencies and stay-at-home orders. But suffice it to say that for the last 4 years, California has been doing really well in terms of increasing registration and registration rates of eligible voters and increasing turnout. I mean, in March, we had both record registration and record turnout, and voter registration in California continues to go up. So let's turn just quickly here to the November election and some things to be aware of. Right after the primary, that's when a lot of the COVID stuff was really impacting communities throughout the state and the country. So we brought a bunch of stakeholders together to ask ourselves the question, how do we approach the November election? It needs to be accessible to all eligible voters. It needs to be secure, because there's still, whether it's cyber threats or foreign interference efforts, those sorts of things towards our elections infrastructure and process. But now we also have to organize an election that is safe from a health perspective, given the risk of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it turns out a lot of the policies that we've championed in recent years to increase access to the ballot make even more sense during this pandemic. From a voter registration standpoint, no safer way to do it than to do it online. And so between automatic registration through DMV, online registration, I'll talk about that in a minute, it's easily done. And let me also just call out for the first time of many times today, a specific website. Robbie from my office, I know you're on, if you can add this to the chat box or somewhere to be shared, vote.ca.gov. A lot of the tools and resources I'm going to mention are available at vote.ca.gov. If you haven't registered to vote yet, and I know most of you are, you can do so easily. Go to vote.ca.gov and click on register to vote. It's that simple. Most of you are already registered, as I saw in the poll, but it's still a good idea to verify your registration status. So go to vote.ca.gov and go to voter status, and you can just check your voter registration record. Make sure everything is current and up to date, especially your address, because as you hopefully have heard, California is sending every active registered voter a ballot in the mail in advance of the November election. Talk more about that in a second. Bottom line, make sure your address is current. If you're willing to share an email address with us, even better, so we can keep you posted in close to real time on any updates or changes before Tuesday, November 3rd. If you need to update your registration, go back to register to vote, and you can do it then and there. Now, your options for voting, for actually casting your ballot this November, while we keep you safe, as I mentioned a second ago, every active registered voter will receive their vote by mail ballot before the November election. So first week of October, in about 4 weeks from now, start checking that mailbox. Ballots go out no less than 29 days before the election in California. So first week of October, you'll probably be receiving your ballot, and you have multiple options for how to return your ballot. The easiest is by mail. I know the Postal Service has been in the news lately, but I still think it's a reliable way to return your ballot. Don't even need to worry about stamps. Return postage is prepaid. But if you choose, you also have the option of returning your ballot to any ballot drop box in your county, convenient to you in the weeks leading up to the election. Or you can walk your ballot into any in-person voting location during the course of the in-person voting period as well. So again, options for how to return your ballot. One other new tool that's going to be very, very important for everybody. It's called Where's My Ballot? Have you ever wondered, when I mail the ballot back, how do I know it got there? How do I know it got counted? We have this tool that we've now expanded statewide. Any voter in the state can go to vote.ca.gov, scroll down to Where's My Ballot, and subscribe to get alerts, either by email, by text message, or by phone call on the status of your ballot through the Postal Service. So you'll know when the county mails the ballot out to you, so you can start checking that mailbox. When you mail the ballot back, the Postal Service will acknowledge they've got possession of it. The county will tell you when they received your ballot, and they'll give you a final confirmation when your ballot has been counted. So great for transparency, great for accountability, and great for confidence in vote by mail, because it's been wildly popular in California. It is safe, it is secure. Don't believe the attacks on vote by mail that you may be hearing in other quarters. But knowing that California has a large and diverse electorate, we know that there's going to be a need for in-person voting as well. And so you have that option as a voter in California. We're working with every county to ensure there's as many safe in-person voting locations available both on and before Election Day. I recommend that you do it early if you can. The more people that we can encourage to vote early, whether it's by mail or in person, we hope leads to shorter lines and a safer experience on Tuesday, November 3rd for folks who put it off to the last minute. So for the specific voting locations and days available, check with your local county or go to vote.ca.gov and scroll down to the polling place information for you. And that actually leads me to two asks, if you will. Number one, we can have successful vote by mail, but as I mentioned, we still need the in-person voting opportunities for people who need them. A lot of the voting locations that we relied on in the past are not available this November. If you've ever voted in a neighbor's garage or at a retirement home, for obvious reasons under COVID, those don't make sense. So we have been on the search for new replacement voting locations. If you have facilities that will lend themselves to a voting location, especially since a lot of campuses are going to remote learning, counties need your help. Some more than others, but counties need your help. A lot of you have done this already, and so we thank you and hope you can continue providing that space. And if statewide we had all the locations that we could dream of, they're not helpful to us if we don't have the poll workers to staff them. And a lot of the seniors and retirees that have helped in prior elections aren't going to be available this November for obvious reasons. So we're also in the midst of a big poll worker recruitment campaign to help with this November election and beyond. So the ask here is, again, the facilities and locations. If you're able, willing, or even have a good idea for us, let us know. There's an email address you can send us that information. It's democracyatwork, all one word, democracyatwork@sos.ca.gov. And then help spread the word on the need for poll workers. Every county needs more poll workers. So go to vote.ca.gov, scroll down to poll worker information, and folks can sign up there. And we'll be the ones to connect those inquiries with the county to sign folks up. They'll get the training, they'll get the PPE, because we're going to keep everybody safe this November. And a good reminder, there's actually compensation for people who work as poll workers for their service. Compensation is a little bit different by county, but it's usually around $100, often more if you're bilingual. And if you look at a 4-day voting period plus training time, that money can add up for folks who can use a little extra pocket change, especially for students as well. So that's kind of a big, broad overview of what things are looking like for this November and the lead up to November. So again, expect your ballot in the mail, options for how to return it, polling place locations, we can use your help, poll worker recruitment, we can use your help by spreading the word. But at the end of the day, it's important that we all participate this November. Every election is important. This one is hugely consequential. And it's not just because of the presidential race on the ballot. Federal, state, local officials are on the ballot. Important propositions in California, likely some local ballot measures as well. So make sure your voice is heard. I'll end with this, because this is our refrain here. No matter how you choose to vote, make a plan, right? Decide now, think now. Are you going to vote by mail, or are you going to choose to vote in person? If you vote by mail, don't put it off till the last minute. Do it as soon as you get the ballot, if you can. If you vote in person, go the first day the voting locations open. Sorry about the kids in the back. I'm a parent like everybody, like a lot of other people. Go vote early if you can, but make a plan, make sure you get it done. Last two things about vote by mail. The ballots are going to go out early, like I said, so plenty of time for the ballot to get to you, even if there's delays. When you return your ballot, make sure that it is postmarked on or before Election Day. State law says as long as you're postmarked on or before Election Day, it can arrive up to 3 days after the election and still be counted. We're extending that deadline to 17 days after the election, as long as it's postmarked on or before Election Day. And last but not least, make sure you sign that return envelope, because the first thing county officials do is check the signature on the envelope with your signature on file as part of your voter registration record to ensure your identity as part of our safeguards of the vote by mail process. So anyway, I wanted to make sure to mention those last two things before we open it up to questions. So you're a smart group, you're an engaged group, you got this, and I just want to give you those updates, and now I'm going to lean on you as ambassadors to help us spread the word.
Well, Secretary Padilla, that was very, very helpful. And I think the information, especially about the poll workers and the fact that in addition to doing an important civic duty, you can get compensated for that. And so we're hoping that some of the participants in this webinar will do that and help our county and help our state. So we appreciate it. So if you still have time for a couple of questions, is that? Mr. Secretary, you still have?
Yes, so just unmuting myself. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think we have time for two questions. Again, but the answer to most of them is go to vote.ca.gov. Information is there. But let's take a few.
Okay, so a short question. How soon do mail-in and drop-off ballots start getting counted?
Good question, because there's going to be an even bigger increase in vote by mail ballots, right? And I'll cut to I think the spirit of the question, which is come election night, we will have, I think, a decent idea on how most races are going to turn out. But for close contests and for final numbers, it takes us a few weeks to finish processing ballots, counting votes, and auditing results before we certify final results in California. So the presidential, we may be in for a few days at least of waiting to see the same process play out in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, etc. So counties are allowed to start what we call processing. Maybe a better word is preparing ballots to be counted. Starting 4 weeks before the election, is the first wave of vote by mail ballots start to come in. They can start with the signature verification. They can start opening those envelopes and prepping those ballots to be counted. But they don't start tabulating votes or reporting any preliminary results until after the polls close on election night. So counties will try to get a jump start, but don't expect any early numbers until after the polls close on Tuesday, November 3rd.
Thank you. All right, I'll try to do this one pretty quickly. I recently did a change of address with the DMV, and the information that was transmitted to the Orange County Registrar of Voters was not correctly added to the green card that I received from the OC registrar. DMV is saying the information to the OC was correct according to their records. So I'll have to take additional steps. Number one, are you noticing a similar trend in other counties? If so, what does the Secretary of State's office have in place to address this? I can't be the only person experiencing this issue.
Yeah, good question. And no, you're not the only one, but the good news is you are the exception to the rule. Vast majority of voter registration transactions, updates to registration, whether it's DMV or online, et cetera, are going through just fine, but it's good for you for checking or for noticing. So the good news again is, number one, we make it easy in California. So verify your registration status. If there's something wrong, erroneous, or out of date, you can easily update that, again, online at registertovote.ca.gov. And it's good to do it earlier rather than later, ideally before the ballots begin to go out. And even then, if for whatever reason there was an issue, you have the option of voting in person, updating your registration in person, or registering to vote in person and still casting your ballot. And worst case scenario, if there's any issue, they can't find your name on the voter file or something like that, you have the option of voting provisionally, and they'll just verify your registration status on the back end and then count your ballot. And vast majority of provisional ballots are approved and counted. So we have a lot of safeguards to catch any issues like you were experiencing.
This is a short question.
Sure.
So much of the voter registration work is often done in person. Have you noticed, or are you aware of any creative and safe approaches to registering voters during the pandemic?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because normally, especially in a presidential year, you're used to people standing in front of the grocery store registering people to vote, or voter registration at community events, health fairs, or even going door to door. That's all out the window because of the pandemic. In other states, they're seeing either a decline in registration or just not the bumps in registration that you would expect to see in a year like this. In California, that's not the case. Our registration numbers continue to go up, again, because we promote online registration and because of people still renewing their driver's license or their state ID or applying for it for the first time. All those registration transactions are still happening. We just announced last Friday, for the first time ever, 21 million voters on the rolls in California. So that's the highest rate of eligible voters registered to vote in a long, long time. So how can you help during COVID? Just help them spread the word. Just like we're keeping in touch with your friends and your classmates and your family by phone call, by Zoom, through social media, etc. You can add the voter registration reminders and the links that I've shared. If you go to our website, you can even download some social media graphics and other images to share to kind of keep it fun, keep it fresh. The last thing I'll mention before we log off here is the ballot bowl. So sorry I didn't mention that earlier. In 2018, we launched the California Ballot Bowl competition between state colleges, universities, and community colleges to see who can register more students in their respective campuses with different categories: large schools, small schools, medium schools, overall number of registered voters or percentage increase of the student population on your campus, even prizes for most creative ideas, those sorts of things. So I like to combine the school spirit together with the spirit of competition and civic engagement to help get the word out on voter registration and voting.
Well, Mr. Secretary, we know you have a very, very busy schedule. We are very grateful to you. Thank you very much. And we know that your staff is also here to answer some other questions. And thank you for your time.
All right, thank you all. Please continue to stay safe.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So as mentioned, if you can continue to do the questions and sorry, I had to turn my video back on. You can continue to ask questions through the Q&A, and we have members of Secretary of State's office who will try to field some of those questions at a later date. So great information, and 55 days. I hope everyone was able to pay attention to some of those key dates. At the end, we will have on our slides some of the key dates and the key websites and information for all of you. So now continuing to the next part of this town hall, I think a nice handoff from the sitting Secretary of State to perhaps a future office holder, but certainly someone who is very involved in civic engagement, in getting out the vote, and working with his fellow students to make sure that the ballot is accessible and that people are registered and they're participating. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the California Community College Student Senate, Andrew Nickens, who is from Folsom Lake College. Vice President Nickens, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Larry, and thank you so much to the League for inviting us and including us in this webinar. I'm really excited to share some things today about the importance of voting and how your colleges can help students get out the vote. Just a little bit about the Student Senate. We are a mostly student-run, but completely student-led organization recognized by the governor, the legislature, and the Board of Governors as the official voice of 2.1 million community college students. A study conducted by the Public Policy Institute of California found that of the California adults aged 18 to 34, which is the vast majority of students in our California community college system, only 22% of those are likely voters this year. Why is that? that's because there are barriers in their place preventing them from participating in our democracy. Most California voters that are likely to vote tend to be older, more educated, affluent homeowners, and US born. They have the time, resources, and most importantly, access to make voting a reality for themselves. What community colleges can do is make access a reality for students, our communities, your communities, and California as a whole. We need colleges to create ballot drop-off locations to provide a safe, reliable, and most importantly, accessible location for students to drop off their ballots. But not only that, those places need to be equipped with staff to provide same-day voter registration to ensure that students have a backup plan if they're already or they're unregistered. Also, colleges need to advertise that about poll student worker opportunities. According to the California Student Aid Commission, 70% of students have lost some or all of their income, and many are still searching for their jobs. And so this is an opportunity that students can take advantage of to support themselves, but then as the secretary mentioned, to really contribute civically to this election. Finally, we need to ensure that those who cannot vote are still made aware that they can get involved through poll working, but also getting involved in campaigns. I would also like to highlight that the SSCCC is strongly pushing the ballot bowl initiative, the competition, and that CSUs won last year, and so we really need to turn that around for us this year. Finally, I'll just say that the only way we get out the vote for the 2020 election is by having community colleges getting serious about making voting a reality for all of our students. So I just wanted to highlight those points that the secretary had mentioned and share a little bit more about why it's so important that community colleges step in during this time, in the time of COVID-19, and make voting accessible for students like it never has been before. So thank you very much, Leigh, for giving us this time, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Andrew. So, Andrew, do you have time for some questions? Perhaps we have questions from individuals who are participating in this webinar. Would you take a couple of questions so we get the student perspective on this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay. So especially if there are any students, not exclusively, but if there are any students online in this participating in the town hall and they're interested in questions about what the Student Senate is doing and any other issues. And while we're waiting, I would like to ask you one question, Andrew. You make some really important points about, in this recession during COVID, the percentage of our students that are experiencing tremendous difficulties just everyday living, let alone doing their studies and participating in campaigns. We always hear every election season, if I can use that term, well, younger people, the 18 to 34-year-olds, don't vote in the numbers that they should. So from your perspective, in 2020, with the last day to vote being November 3rd here in California, what's your best pitch for why especially students should vote and participate in this election?
Well, I think that question is easily answered by looking what's on the ballot this year when we're in a historic presidential election. But also there are a number of issues on the ballot in terms of propositions that have been hanging over the heads of Californians for decades. Equal opportunity, the split roll initiative and money for our schools and communities, These are all issues that students should be made aware of. And once they are, I think it truly is self-evident why it's so important to vote, because those issues need to be answered by California voters. They're critical to giving California a leg up during this pandemic. And the only way we do that is by spreading that message and by getting students to vote. Those propositions have a very, very potentially a very impactful outcome for us.
Right. As Proposition 15, the so-called split roll, and Proposition 16, in terms of affirmative action, as it had been called, and so those are two directly will impact our institutions, our students, and really everybody. So one question that we have here, the secretary at the end mentioned the ballot bowl, and you mentioned it as well. So one of the questions, if I can find it again, was, I think it was, how do you find out more information about the ballot bowl? Where can you find more information about that?
That information is available on the Secretary of State's website. I believe a couple of questions have been answered with links to that site, but I highly encourage visiting it. The Secretary of State has been very helpful in their office in providing very easy to use, accessible toolkits, and some of them for getting out the vote, but very detailed explanation of the ballot bowl and how to get students and your college and students involved in that. Furthermore, it serves as a very helpful metric in determining how civically engaged your college is. When students register to vote and participate in the ballot bowl, those numbers pop up for the college, and you have a live indication of how many students are ready to go for election day. So it's a very helpful tool, and it really should be encouraged by everyone in the community college system. So
great. So here's a question from Karen Weinstein, who is a trustee. It says, I'm a trustee, and I'm wondering how we can make voting accessible when most students are not on campus.
yeah, I think an appropriate way to do that is by using the channels of communication that the district has, whether it be mailings to students, keeping them updated about key deadlines for the election, ways to get registered. I think providing that information to students and getting it in their face about that with along those channels of communication would be very beneficial. Keeping in mind that those messages should be very accessible, very easily digestible, so that it's simple to follow along and to complete those action items like getting registered, finding out where you should drop off your ballot or vote.
So here's a cultural anthropological question of sorts. So it says, Andrew, as a student, what would be most likely to get your attention in terms of voting related messaging? Social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, any of those, all of those, or a combination, or something not mentioned? What do you think is the most effective means to communicate with, let's say, 18 to 34-year-olds? Not that that's the totality of students, but.
Yeah, I would say, whatever's most direct will be most efficient. I mean, everyone nowadays is bombarded with so much information, and I think social media can be a very helpful tool. I've realized that in surfing on some social media apps that there are notifications about getting registered, and it's very easy to follow through and access those. But I know specifically for my district, Los Rios Community College District, there is a very helpful link in our kind of intranet for students, our e-services, that has links to voter registration, and so it's all integrated within that. And so whatever you can do to make it most easily accessible within current channels that a student is already following, I think would be most effective.
Great. So it looks like we have the bulk of the questions that, there's a lot of kudos to you, Andrew. People mentioning they're proud of you. Other questions for the Secretary of State. So, Andrew, I'd like to give you this a little time for just your final thoughts on, from your perspective, working with California Community College students, what message would you have to trustees, superintendent presidents, chancellors, and your fellow students in terms of the voting process, engagement, or anything having to do with what we've been talking about, civic participation? And one question that that hasn't been covered to much a degree is, some people are unable to vote because of their status. Of course, though, they can indeed participate in the process by getting involved in a campaign. So anything you could say about that, and then just generally a message that you would like to get across to trustees, CEOs, and even your fellow students?
Yeah, first I'll start by addressing administrators, CEOs. Definitely the items the Secretary of State mentioned, making sure that your college is providing that space necessary for students to vote, ballot drop-off locations, making sure that your college is participating in the ballot bowl competition. And then finally, I would say, somewhat unmentioned today, is AB 963 was a bill that was passed went into effect this year, which requires that there be an on-campus, on-college coordinator, which is supposed to work with students to develop a civic engagement plan for the college. And that involves ways on getting out the vote locally, strategies to engage students in that. And that is something that the SSCCC will be addressing with students and colleges, and making sure that a coordinator is identified and that those action plans are being developed, so that outreach doesn't just happen at this level, at the state level. It happens locally and within those colleges. And then to your kind of second point or question, just because someone can't vote doesn't mean they still can't get involved. There are lots of opportunities to get involved in local elections, in your county, in your city, statewide, if you're supporting one of your legislators, or on the campaigns for some of these propositions. Your status, your ability to vote doesn't affect your participation in any of those things, and actually might have a greater impact than simply just casting a vote. It helps you stay engaged and updated, and then spreads that to others. So thank you very much.
Well, Andrew Nickens, wonderful job. Thank you very much. And we appreciate your perspective and for you spending the time with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. So just as a reminder, we have information that, again, this information will be available afterwards, but we think it's worthwhile highlighting and going over it. So again, for this 2020 election, the deadline for voter registration is Monday, October 19th, which is 15 days prior to the election. So again, your registration deadline is October 19th. So for your friends and colleagues who are not registered yet, they have a little bit of time. So keep that in mind. And counties will be sending out ballots, as the Secretary of State said, and early voting will begin approximately 29 days prior to the election on Monday, October 5th. And I would imagine that many people on this participating in this town hall and this webinar will be voting as soon as they get their ballot, and as recommended by the Secretary of State, filling out your ballot and turning it in as quickly as possible, so that we don't have a backlog as we get closer to that final day. I know I will be voting as soon as I can. And I used to live in Oregon, and in Oregon, of course, is one of the states. It's always been, well, not always, but for decades, it's been all mail-in ballots. And the voter participation is typically higher than it is in most other states because of that fact. But they didn't necessarily pay for the postage. So it's nice to hear that the postage will be paid for. And then, as Secretary of State Padilla said, the final day of voting is Tuesday, November 3rd. So if your ballot is postmarked by November 3rd, that final day, there's still 17 days for it to arrive in the county registrar's office. So that's also very good to know, and very important. I think we probably have another slide. So for questions about voting, Dropbox location, and if you're interested in being a poll worker, which is compensated as well, Robbie Abalon is the Deputy Secretary of State for Policy and Planning. And there is his email address, there is his phone number. We were talking with him earlier. He's eager to be helpful. The Secretary of State's office wants to help you. So
Larry, Robbie is also on the line and is available to answer questions.
Oh, okay. So why don't we take advantage of that? All right. So Robbie, the rumor is that you're on the line and you can answer some of the technical questions that our voters might have. So you want to go ahead and just take over?
Sure, be happy to answer some of the questions. And I think for the questions that we aren't able to get to, I think I can also take it in writing and be able to provide it back to you and your staff to provide to those who have had those questions. Does that sound good?
Perfect, perfect.
Okay.
So you want me to toss the questions, or you can read them and you go ahead and grab them?
Sorry, my windows are kind of all jumbled here. If you want to
Okay.
toss me the question and I'll see if I can answer.
Sure. So one of the questions is the Secretary of State's office using CSU and community college campuses for either drop boxes or for polling or for other means?
Yeah, so this past March primary actually, I think, has been the largest amount of higher education institutions that we've used for both as voting locations and then also for drop-off locations. And even though it was probably the largest amount we have seen on the CSU, UCs, community colleges, and also private universities, there's still always a need for more, specifically with some of the changes that we had, especially now that we're moving to 100% vote by mail. That makes it that much more critical for drop boxes to be available, not just for their availability, but to be available at high profile locations like community colleges. We know that some people may not know where this exact Dropbox is or where that one is, but they say community college here. Most people within their own community knows where that community college is. So for those that have been participating in previous elections and for this November election, we thank you. And for those of you who are thinking about it or may be available, that need is still there for many of the counties up and down throughout the state of California for drop-off locations and also for voting locations as well. Just a couple of things to keep in mind for voting locations. Like the Secretary said, locations like your neighbor's garage or senior living facilities are no longer available. So we're looking for locations that have 2,400 square feet of space at least to accommodate for social distancing, and then have be ADA accessible and have accessibility to parking and public transportation are some of the key components. But we know that community colleges, nearly all of them, if not all of them, already check those boxes. So if you're interested in being one or wanting to continue to be one, my contact information is up here and we can go ahead and get going. And we've done that already with several of your community colleges within the last month or so, from letting them know to getting them connected. And some of them within the course of say 72 hours were available to get signed off to become either drop-off location or voting location. But to answer your question, yes, CSUs, UCs, community colleges, and private universities, we've been using those locations and are relying on many of those for this November election as well.
Oh, that's very helpful information. I have a feeling after this, you're going to be getting some contacts from interested trustees, CEOs, PIOs, and others from the California community colleges interested in helping out in that way, either for drop boxes or for polling booths. So that's wonderful. So this is I think a good question. So I've had more than one signature. So should I add both signatures to make sure my vote is counted? So what do you do that if you're one of those people, and I'm guilty, you have more than one signature, you know.
So there you can actually provide your county with the signature that they have for their signature matching that they have for when you return your ballot ahead of time. So we do encourage people, if you have slight changes, it's usually okay. But if you have major changes into your signature, probably one of the main reasons actually is if you have changed your name due to marriage or so, or legally changed your name. That has been a big point that we're asking you to go ahead and you can provide your county with your new signature to do so it's matching there that they have on ballot. Or if you are registering with your paper ballot as well for re-registering, on there is your signature, and they will be able to use that for your verification as well.
Great. So we've heard a lot about election fraud. So what mechanisms have been put in place to stop fraud from happening in this election?
Sure. The thought and discussion about voter fraud may have been probably brought up more within the last few months or so, but there are security and provisions that have been built into our elections as a whole, not just for the state of California, but throughout the country. First, it is a myth, you cannot hack a state election. We have 58 counties that have 58 different ways of doing things that are a little bit different than each other. And they're all self-contained systems that they do their counting and stuff. They do their counting and their reporting and then report to us with what they have. So to do a systemic statewide effort is impossible or near impossible for those thoughts. The second thing is vote by mail. All of our voting, whether you vote by mail or in person, is done via paper. So no electronic machines that's being used. You have a paper form that you can check out to see how you had voted, and you cannot hack a piece of paper. And then the final piece that we're pretty proud of within the last year or so, we created an Office of Cybersecurity to monitor misinformation that's going on around the state and what's happening online as well, to be able to address those. And with those partnerships, within the last election, actually, 93% of those that we have identified as misinformation was taken down relatively quickly with our partners at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and a couple other social media platforms as well. So something we've been in mind for the past couple elections, and are ramping it up even more for this upcoming November 2020 election.
Well, those have to be some of the busiest people monitoring cyber disinformation. So that's good to know that no shortage of work there. So I'm gonna sort of combine two questions, and one is from actually the League's trustee board president and the chair of the League. And this question was directed to Secretary of State Padilla. I think you can help answer this. A lot of concern, because there's a lot of media attention, of course, to the presidential election, which we know is not the only race on the ballot. But what's being, there are concerns that outside of California, and where California has a lot of protections, is there anything that people can do, or is there either to help the Secretary of State's office or just as citizens that they can do to either ensure voting is more accessible to people in other states, and also anything that people can do to help the Secretary of State's office with concerns about election day, or the last day to vote, and the time between the election day and inauguration. Is there anything that Californians can do for these problems?
Yeah, maybe I can go kind of timeline wise and see. So we've definitely had a push for poll workers, and thank you, Larry, and your organization for getting that word out, and for your colleges for doing so. But also what has been a robust push as well has been for election observers as well. So here in the state of California, anyone actually can be an election observer. So for those who want to go to in-person voting to make sure that those locations are up and running. So say, for example, that they are up and running on the hours that they're advertised, everything from the services that they're supposed to provide, that they are providing it. And we also have information hotline as well to let us know, and the counties do too, if there's anything that's seen there. And also being eyes and ears for a variety of different things. So things like if there's electioneering going on within 100 feet of the voting location, the staff can't be everywhere at once. So election observers have been very helpful in allowing us to do so. And that's the in-person as the voting is happening. So for example, on the last day of voting, to make sure all that is happening and all the rules are being abided to. But also for voter observation, not only when the election has stopped at 8 p.m. on November 3rd, there's still so much more to be done. So the state of California and all the counties have been a partner in moving forward for transparency. So there are election observations that are available where those votes are actually being counted. So you can go to your county registrar and there's observation programs where you as an interested citizen have the right to go there and see how they're being counted, how they're being, and it's available, and it's in a wide open room. And you can also have clearance to be closer to it as well, to be an election observer, to make sure that everything is being counted properly and all the securities that are built in for transparency and for voter protection are being met on the county level. And we encourage this on the statewide level too. There's many nonprofits that do this. We also have our own observation program statewide as well that we do send to other counties. And then also for the observations for the counting of it as well, to make sure that everything is being done properly and all voter protections are there. And then when it comes to other states, probably one of the biggest things that we have seen that can be helpful, well, two things. One is making sure the other voters in other states are aware of the rules, are aware of the laws when it comes to voting. So I think the secretary may have brought it up earlier, but other states do not have the same provisions that we do. So for example, a provision that we have is when you turn in your vote by mail and it's postmarked on or before November 3rd, it has 17 days to arrive before it gets counted. That provision isn't available for most states. Most of them either have to not even be postmarked, but have to arrive in their registrar's in their county registrar or their election official on or before that day. So if it arrives afterwards, many of them does not count, even if it's postmarked on that day. It definitely varies state by state, but even knowing that information can help make sure that many people have their vote counted. So that's one big thing, is making sure that basic information and also knowing the rights of voters for each of those states is immensely important. And then second, good old fashioned information and activism. So being able to push politically the election officials from those states, or the Secretary of States for those states, or the governor, for example, can still provide some changes, much needed changes, particularly when it comes to COVID, to make sure that safety is available, but also that it does not affect the access to voting for all voters. So all those are on the table, and we do encourage anyone, if there's any one of those points that you really want to be involved in, there is a way for you to get involved, and there's a space for you to make sure that these protections are met, that people are made aware of, and accountability and accessibility and transparency is available.
Well, Robbie, this has been very, very helpful. And we appreciate the fact that you and your colleagues are in the Secretary of State's office doing a lot of this hard work and helping secure the ballot, making it accessible, and strengthening civic participation and the security and the safety of the vote here in California. So we're really grateful to you. And we have your information there online, you and your colleagues. And thank you again. We really are grateful to you and the secretary. And so we have one more slide before we end this. So the league will have a couple of more webinars, and specifically on Wednesday, September 16th at 2 o'clock, we will have a focus on Proposition 16, the campaign for repeal of Proposition 209. So again, mark your calendars for Wednesday, September 16th from 2 to 3 p.m. For that educational session. We'll go into the history, and we'll have some people who are very knowledgeable about the background and exactly what is in Proposition 16. And then additionally, in the following week, the league will host Proposition 15. We will have people from the Campaign of Schools and Communities First. You hear people refer to this as the split roll. This one would reform or change Proposition 13 from 1978 and potentially lead to hundreds of millions of dollars for K-14 public education. So again, we hope you have enjoyed today's town hall, and we thank you for your participation. And we also hope that you will be available for the next two. I want to thank the league staff for doing a phenomenal job. I want to thank the Secretary of State. I want to thank Andrew Nickens and the Student Senate for all their hard work. And thank you for participating in this. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar on Proposition 16, Opportunity for All, on Wednesday, September 16th. Thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.